Here with Lucas Jones, ABCA A-Tech Division III Coach of the Year. Lynchburg won their first national championship and then 48-8 record. And we talked a little bit in Cedar Rapids on practice day. So Lucas, thanks for jumping in with me.
Ryan, thanks for having me again.
Yep. And a little bit of a life change for you this summer. I mean, is it easier or harder after you win a national championship?
Well, I think just from probably a professional aspect of things, it's probably gets a little bit more difficult just trying to figure out, how to stay, on top of the mountain and have that joyous feeling and what that would look like as you as you transfer kind of the 2023 season into the 2024 season. But um, that certainly kind of weighs on your mind. But then, yeah, making the decision to kind of step away for a little while for some mental health and illness reasons, just kind of puts you in a spot of honestly, baseball is the last thing I'm thinking about. As difficult a decision it was, it's more about just trying to put myself in a good position to feel better and put myself kind of in the moment more than I probably ever have.
Yeah, and just reading a little bit, it seemed like you've been dealing with this for a little bit, correct?
Yeah, over specifically probably has resonated over the last 5+ seasons, but probably well before that. But I just really didn't understand what maybe I was putting myself through, or kind of what that was, leading to, or kind of those feelings that, ultimately have kind of grown in a not so great healthy way, to get me again to kind of making this decision and um, you know being able to see the 2023 season, which honestly originally was hard for me to kind of see through. I've kind of had these discussions with myself and my wife and my family for the last couple of years of hey, is this a time to step back? And through some prayer and some thought, I wanted to give it at least a 2023 season to see really that first recruiting class, because a lot of those guys were back for their fifth year, and honestly kind of see that through. And very fortunate to be a part of that, and especially again what kind of lied on the front end to make that decision.
Did you share much of that with the team while you're going through it?
No, none. Unfortunately, fortunately, depending on how you look at it, really the first inkling of anything that I was dealing with was the Zoom call that informed them to the fact that I wouldn't be returning as a head coach for the 2024 season. And that Bees would be taken over. It was pretty quick and to the point, and then ultimately the goal with kind of sharing the letter, online. I'm not a big social media presence, so that was really my way of, instead of having to field phone calls, was my way of kind of sharing the personal side of what I've been dealing with to kind of help them understand. And so I kind of shared that before I shared it with others in the public, just so they again had a sense of why I was doing what I was doing. I just don't know if I had the capacity and the understanding to communicate my thoughts and feelings about making this decision. So writing for me has always been a little bit more of a an avenue that has served me well in the past to be able to share what I've been dealing with, or just feelings on a topic or whatnot.
Do you journal much?
I try to, yeah. I try to. I get in good habits where I'm consistently on it, and then I'll like some other things. I'll get off track, but yeah, writing has always kind of been my thing. So I like to journal, but still not to the stage where I can be the blogger and and some of the
You'd be
things that
surprised. I mean,
have
if
been
you do like
helpful. Yeah, they've
writing,
been
if you're
helpful, no
passionate
doubt.
about it's helpful, man. Like it helps me.
Yeah,
They call it pages. I think it's Cameron is the lady's last name. That I think the Writer's Way is the name of the book, and I haven't really done a lot of that, but there are a lot of good writers out there that swear by that just sit
yeah.
down and get your thoughts out first thing in the morning. I can't remember Cameron's first name, but yeah, it's called The Writer's Way. So
Okay.
it was good episode with her and Tim Ferriss.
Oh, cool.
That yeah, just talking about that, and again, that's a mental health thing too. Is just get your thoughts out, and rather than hold it in. And I give you a lot of credit because I just don't think many people can probably separate that out and do the job that you did this year with that team when you're dealing with the other stuff. And it's good that you're trying to get help right now, but it's also a credit to you that you're able to do that. And I think as head coaches we all go through that you try not to bring what you have going on off the field onto the field with your guys because you are the leader of the program, but at the same time there's gonna be life instances that happen that you just can't work anything around it.
Yeah, no, it gets tiring. It gets
Yeah.
exhausting having to present in a way that makes people or your team or your coaches feel as though you're doing well outwardly, and then the inside you're just you're struggling for whatever reason, whether it's anxiety, depression, or even further. And so, yeah, that kind of act every day can definitely consume you, and unfortunately, you kind of get into especially in a role of leadership, you kind of get into that question of vulnerability. You get into that question of, hey, what needs to be shared, what doesn't need to be shared, and then that world telling you this masculinity, hey, got to be this tough mentality, and a tough kind of resource for these young men that are in your program. And in reality, is probably the opposite, right? You need to be able to essentially share some of those things that you're dealing with. And because in reverse roles, we ask them, right? This is such a prevalent topic amongst our young people these days, whether it's athletes or just in general. And we ask them to share. We ask them, if they're not comfortable with their coaches or their peers, hey, go talk to somebody on campus. I mean, there's days and hours and resources spent to communicate that with our particular athletes at Lynchburg. But yet in your return as a coach and an adult, you don't do those same things that you're asking your kids really to do. And you genuinely do want them to attach to those resources. And I just kind of, always felt really hypocritical about that, because I would always kind of just, again, downplay what I'm dealing with, because I needed to make sure that I express that I'm in control of these situations. And just, human nature, sometimes you're just not. And that's okay. And I think once you rally that group around you and they can understand that, it's a relief, because you feel that support, you feel that love.
Yeah, because they get it, and they're going through it. Like they are right in it. The 18 to 24-year-olds are right in it with all of that, and I think that's kind of the direction where it's starting to head a little bit more, is being a little bit more vulnerable with your team. I think they appreciate it a little bit more, and then I do think it makes it easier for them going forward if they do run into some issues, because they're going to deal with a lot of things as 18 to 23-year-olds, and it's just I felt like at the end when I started to be a little bit more vulnerable with them, I felt better, but then I felt like they were able to open up a little bit more to me about things that were going on. But we got a long way to go. When you look at the numbers, like we got a long way to go to get this thing. I don't think we'll ever get it fixed, but
Yeah.
we got a long way to go. I mean, other than that, it has to be gratifying for you, Lynchburg grad from Lynchburg, go out and do what you guys did this year. I mean, did you feel come into the year that okay, we got a chance to do this thing?
Well, I'm not sure I would sit there and say, at the beginning of all of this, like, hey, we're going to be playing the last day of Iowa, but or the last day in Iowa. But I did feel very strongly about our team, especially on the mound. We just had a lot of depth. We had a lot of young talent that was coming in that was just maybe unproven, so you were just a little uncertain about that. But then we had some horses at the front of the line that certainly carried us through that World Series, and their performances that enabled us to have a shot to win this thing. And really, the whole postseason, those guys did their thing. And when you have a core like that, just it's a blessing in disguise almost, because all those guys were freshmen and sophomores when COVID hit. So we've really felt great about that group that came in, but then everything kind of stops. But hey, where they were as freshmen and sophomore versus where they were as seniors and fifth years is just drastically different, right? mentality is different, their experiences are different, their physicality is different. So yeah, I think we felt confident. I think once we got through the super regional, playing, in our opinion, one of the best teams in the country at the time, Shenandoah. I think when we got to the World Series, that messaging was, "Hey, listen, we've been tested. We've had the experiences to date. We've been able to prevail in victory over those, 4 week stretches from the conference tournament to the regional to the super regional. So I think the opponents helped lift us up, right? And I think not having that, oh, this is our first time here, and having a little bit more of that ownership of, you know what, like we're pretty good too. Now we do it a lot differently probably than the other 7 teams that were there, which again was okay. But yeah, I think once we started to get middle to back into the season, and Brandon Pond got back to kind of getting in that routine where his pitch count was growing over, from injury from over this previous season. Yeah, I think we started to feel like, okay, this is something that could be pretty special. But in the end, you do need to stay healthy, and you do need to have things that will kind of line up accordingly, and have some luck, have some breaks fall your way. And we were fortunate to have all those things.
I mean, how much prep work? There's not a lot of turnaround time between when you get done with the supers and then head to the World Series. How much prep time were you guys able to do on the opponents?
We were able to do a little bit, but it's hard, especially in our pod with East Texas. Not a whole lot of common opponents there. Wisconsin lacrosse, not a whole lot of common opponents there. And then Salisbury was probably our most recognizable, even though we haven't played them except for a couple regionals in a row. They were probably our common opponent in terms of at least knowing them a little bit better, and knowing who they were and how good they were. And then we get there and just not even playing them, right? And that's just kind of the tournament format. And you're expecting, okay, well, they're obviously really good, but so is everybody else. And so that's just kind of how it kind of played out, interestingly enough. So it's more about, at that point, I think, just doing what you do well and just kind of focusing on that. Certainly in game stuff or prior games, I think our assistants did a great job of kind of collecting the information that we had and just formulating a game plan against some really good offenses. And again, it comes down to just what you do well and your execution, right? If you don't have a great slider versus a team that you can beat, with a slider, then obviously we can't make that up in a week's format. So it's just about, again, pitching to your strengths and being able to defend. We felt like if we could do that, then we'd have a chance, to score enough runs to win.
I mean, what is the mentality there offensively? Your pitching is really good. You're going to keep the score down. So, what is the mentality there offensively? Because not that you're offensively challenged, but it's almost that two double-edged sword. It's like, okay, we know we don't need to score very many runs, but we still have to score runs.
Yeah, I mean, we had a thing called the cube all year, and it was really kind of formulated around lineups and just different lineups. I think over the course of the 50 something games, we started to get a couple of severe, crucial injuries at the back end of the season, into the postseason, which kind of stalled a little bit of what we had done during the regular season. But I think in our 40 regular season games, we had used, I think it was like 35 or 36 different lineups. And it was all centered around the value of the run, and scoring the run. Again, knowing our strengths were going to be defensively, knowing our strength was going to be on the mound. It was just about, okay, how do we create more runs, right? Whether it's driving them in or scoring them. And so there was a formula that I picked up from actually a previous graduate assistant who's now at UNC Greensboro, Cody Ellis, and he had gotten it from one of his colleagues who had gotten it from somebody else. And I kind of took the run value and then kind of incorporated a little bit into our own system with the cube. And it honestly, it changed the dynamic of what we were doing. We had some core players that we knew were going to be in there every day, but then we had a pretty good, kind of rotation going, and not necessarily like this guy plays this game, this guy plays that game. Some of it was based on matchup, some of it was based on feeling. But it just energized that group, of 13, 14 positional players that were kind of in that conversation because every day they showed up to the ballpark. And trust me, I mean, there's some value in, hey, here are your nine, they're really good and they're going to go out, but you're going to endure injuries, you're going to endure some struggles, some slumps. And so being able to have that buffer, being able to have that collective group kind of understand what we were trying to do as a lineup, and then again value the run. And do we want guys that can hit doubles and home runs? Absolutely, but it's also about base running. It's also about putting ourselves in great positions to score, and give those guys those chances to drive and run. So again, I think that was, our offense. And I've said this 1,000 times, like we didn't have a lot of exceptional like hitters, like they can do whatever they want to do at the plate. It was more of just a collective general belief in a great offense. And I think that's what we were able to, build throughout the season, and got us going, as we got into the postseason.
Did you lay the cube out then for the guys? Be like, hey, this is what it's
We
going to look
did,
like. We
yeah,
might have a
yeah.
bunch of
We
different lineups. We're just trying to score as many runs as we can with our pitching and defense. Did you communicated that with the guys?
Yeah, we did. We tried to kind of do it in phases, based on kind of where guys were. It was green, yellow, and purple. And so we just kind of generated that based on where they were, and some was production from years past. Like, I mean, Avery Neves, he was, I mean, obviously off the charts, two-time All-American Player of the Year type of guy. And so we kind of based some things off of past year's numbers of what we'd expect. And we had some young guys. We had obviously a middle, there were two freshmen. So it's more about projecting, okay, this guy can produce this many runs throughout the season, based on runs scored and RBI situations. So yeah, we tried to do it as best we could. And funny enough, they just kind of, they um, they really bought into that. They got excited about that, and it was kind of like that little running joke, the cube wins again type of thing. And again, there's not a whole lot of algorithm or science to it. It was more about just a game plan and a philosophy that worked for the group, instead of overdoing it. Just got them excited a little bit more about their role and what they could do, because pitching, I mean, pitching is a little bit easier to navigate because you do have, these sectors and these roles that these guys play, and they kind of know, and they can establish themselves a little bit over the season. But offensively, it can be really hard if what, I'm showing up, and the guy in front of me is a two-time All-American. I know I'm not going to play. Well, no, that's not always the case, right? It might not be in left, it might be in right, it might be as a DH, it might be coming off the bench, but the value is the run. Like, how do we do that? And again, it was our philosophy, and it may not work every year, but with this particular group, we felt like this was gonna mesh well with them.
I mean, how do those conversations evolve over time with having good freshmen, sophomores, but knowing they're going to be really good as seniors and fifth year guys? And there's a lot of luck with that too, to have a fifth year guy be able to come back. Like, how do those
Yeah.
conversations evolve over a 4 or 5 year period with guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think early on it's just hammering in them the development, right? The work that it takes, and the Coach Robichaux is saying, I remember vividly, like, you work while you wait, or you work while you play. We call it work while you perform, right? But same meaning, and just as progression goes, hey, if you're fortunate to get on the field and learn while you play, then it becomes a little bit more of, hey, how can we evolve into some things on the field and off the field, right? Our service, our leadership, the core values of the program, being able to kind of take those and run with them, and year to year, having those guys believe in that, so that the next group coming in, they've experienced it. Now they can help this young man kind of come in and grow and transition a little bit easier versus the, hey, well, I'm older now, you have to do all the things that I did, and it's just not fair, right? It's just not a fair system when you have what you feel like coming in is this hierarchy, and it's just not the way we want to be able to establish ourselves as a culture. We want to have guys that come in that have a belief that, hey, I could feel like I've been here for a day or 4 years, and it feels like it's home. It feels like it's a group that has the same mission in mind. And certainly there's a learning curve to that, but I think as guys progress, it's more important for them to understand that than for freshmen to really understand that, because they're not going to know a lot of what they're dealing with and what they're approaching because they just haven't experienced it yet. And so for those guys to evolve, the Brandon Garcias, the Ben Joneses, the guys that are really good, but we had some guys off the field that didn't get to play early on, but they'll also be able to help this process along and continue to grow this culture.
Is that part of the campus environment too at Lynchburg?
I think as a wholesale, yeah, I think from just what the mentality is as a campus community, from our athletic director to really a lot of the resources and campus involvement. It's a neat place. It's a unique place. We're in a college town, so to speak, where you have Liberty right down the road, which is vastly different in terms of numbers and campus layout. And you have Randolph, which is a little bit similar to us, but a little bit smaller. So you have a good little network of schools that you're surrounded by. And so when you look around and yeah, I want to be able to establish kind of a uniqueness and a difference about what you're doing. I think certainly if you walk on campus, you'll feel that, and you'll be able to experience that pretty quickly.
I mean, what's it say about the high school baseball in Virginia? Your roster is mostly Virginia kids.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you look across just even at the Division III level. I mean, obviously, the ODAC outside of Guilford, it is all Virginia schools, and it's one of the toughest conferences in the country. But then you have, CNU doesn't make life any easier there in Newport News, and then you had Mary Washington and Fredericksburg do what they did this year and get in that large bid. And then geographically, obviously, you have some really strong schools, Salisbury and Maryland, and some Mid Atlantic stuff. But yeah, in Virginia, it's absurd. Just how much talent is at the Division III level, and I think part of that is because there is really no Division II system. I mean, I think there's a sporadic school here or there, maybe UVA wise. Virginia State if they're still Division II, but there's not really that core Division II system that you're having to battle with. So you'll see a lot of kids that'll make these decisions to go to the Division III level because, hey, academically it feels a little bit more at home or just an easier transition. Or, hey, I feel like I can go to one of these programs and had an offer to play at one of these mid-major schools, but really felt like I could make an impact sooner if I decided to go to a Lynchburg or a Macon or, any of these really top high priority programs in our state.
I mean, did you feel at any point during the year that you were in trouble at all? I mean, no turning points really. You didn't lose back-to-back games all season.
No, we didn't. I mean, I think there was a little bit of anxiety. I think when we lost the first game to Bridgewater in the conference tournament that first weekend, best of three. It was our first home loss of the year. I think we went like 22 or 23-1 at home, and that was our only loss. And you just kind of, you kind of expected it, and the messages was almost like a relief of guys like it's really hard, to do anything at this level and in baseball undefeated, right? Whether it's a home record or I said, unfortunately, it just so happened to be, the first game of the conference tournament, and you're still kind of like, all right, I think we're in a good position for an at-large bid, but we lose two, we don't make it to the next round. It just leaves things up for question and kind of out of your control a little bit. So I think that was really the only point. And the next day they responded, really well, and then ended up getting the rain and having to play, a third day. And I think once we got that second game, I think guys felt pretty confident, just again, based on our depth, based on where we were and what we had experienced the 2 seasons before. And almost once we got through that, first weekend, I think everything else, not easy, but it just was like, okay, now we can go. Now we can really kind of excel and do what we need to do.
Do you like the championship series format at the World Series?
I really liked it this year. I really did. And I
Well,
think,
winning it helps.
yeah, winning it does help, but I think some of the adjustments, and again, obviously being our first year, I didn't know a whole lot of what to expect, but because it's opposite of how we run our conference tournament. We do the best of three and then the four, where it's the four pod and then the best of three. So kind of that was unique in a sense of, hey, we've experienced something completely different, 3 weeks before. but I think the day's rest was really what was really neat. And just talking to some of the NCAA reps and talking to some of the coaches that have been there in the past, I think that was a little bit of their frustration is just kind of this run on sentence and you're playing really well. And then you look up and you're having to put a guy in a position that's thrown 4 or 5 innings all year, which again, like, but you're still in a, you're still in a winner's bracket or in a higher position in the tournament, and you're still having to put these guys in those scenarios and those experiences. It's just not fair to them, and it's just not fair to where you've gotten yourself to. So I think those built-in days where if you do win those first two, you have that Sunday off, and then you got that automatic day off before the national championship series. So you're rewarded 2 or 3 times throughout that week. And so I think that format itself is just huge for the student athlete experience because it also allows you to, enjoy more than just the baseball part, right? We went to one of our off days up to Field of Dreams and took the team up there on the bus, and a lot of the families went. And so we got to experience that. And it's crazy how many, how much memory from that I take from it because half the kids, if not 3/4 of the kids, had never seen the dang movie. And I'm like, fellas, like, come on. Like, I feel old. I feel old, but like, how have you not seen Field of Dreams? But then they go back and they watch it and they're like, oh my gosh, like, what a great movie. And I was just there. So I think some of that too, you get to experience, and it's not all baseball all the time, is pretty neat for what they've been able to do there.
And still have the stadium set up. I
Yeah.
appreciate that they're actually still playing games there now.
Yep. Yep.
It's a good thing that Major League Baseball did. It shines more of a light on there, the Field of Dreams field. It's
Yeah,
tremendous.
for sure. No, it was a cool environment and something that certainly I'll remember because my kids were there. My little kids were there, and I just remember watching them run around. And they have no idea what they're running around on, right? But I'm like, gosh, in a couple of years, you're going to realize, like, wow, that's where I was. That's what I was doing. So,
Do you appreciate the balance of academics and athletics at the Division III level?
I do. I mean, I've always, certainly guys, especially guys that we have recruited, we want them to make a decision where baseball is a high priority, right? And it's not baseball first, school second by any means, but there can be that, that wholesome, but also, in a way, I don't like how it's all this misnomer that is all pushed on academics at the Division III level, and then it's
Great
I mean
teams,
you
by the
can
way. I say it all the
succeed,
time. I
yeah,
say it every year. Great teams at
you can
Division III.
succeed at any
Great teams.
place academically,
Yes.
right? And once you start to get your mindset out of once you start to get your mindset out of, hey, ABCDF, and you get your, hey, I want to gain experience. I want to figure out how to work hard. It'll translate between the field. It'll translate into the classroom. And it's like, if I give a great effort in this class or on my assignments and I get a C, then so be it. Right. And it's not just chasing a grade, it's chasing the experience. And it's just a 4 year commitment to extend what you're coming in with and leave with a better understanding of what the world is preparing you for. And so, I mean, very rarely, are people going to sit down and be like, well, what was your GPA? Right. I mean, some of these graduate programs and some of these fields, yeah, grades are important to set a standard, but mostly it's going to be, well, how, if you were given this leadership role, how would you handle it? If you were given this personality and this group to work with, like, how would you handle this situation? Like these questions that, if you just go, and it's that puke knowledge all the time, then it's hard to really take experiences and grow from that and learn from that. Instead, it's just, all right, well, I want to get an A, I want to memorize this information, and then I'm not going to think about it for the rest of the semester or the rest of my life. And so there is that balance, I think, that Division III and an education at, again, I can only speak at Lynchburg and, my time as a graduate assistant at VCU and graduate student at VCU in terms of my education. But I mean, my experience was, hey, I'm going to get a well-rounded education, but I want it to prepare me for my passions in life, not for, hey, I've got to meet this grade and this success and this GPA in order to feel like I've made it. as a student athlete throughout that. And I think that, can be experienced everywhere. Depends on how you kind of go into it and what, the people you're around and the framework that they're going to put in place for you to, pursue that too, right? Everybody's a little bit different on how they challenge their student athletes, but yeah, student is important,
But you're a
but we
good
also
example of
want
that. I
to
mean, you look at
balance it.
what you did as a player on the field and also in the classroom. I mean, you were excellent at both. You excelled at both. You excelled in the classroom and you excelled on the field.
Well, I appreciate that. But, the classroom thing was, again, it's just hard work. I'm not I was actually talking with a
I was the
buddy
same
this
way.
morning about
It
that.
was just it was just pure work,
Never the smartest person in the
pure work.
room. Never just was figured out how to work. And I think, that has helped aid me in other areas of my life to help me kind of be motivated, through that work process, and I've never devalued that. And that, again, you observe and fortunate to be around, parents and upbringing where that's important. And, you want to be able to relay that stuff to, to your players, and to your system that, hard work pays off. You don't have to be the best. You don't have to be the brightest. You don't have to be the A or the 400 hitter. You work hard. Like, yeah, hopefully you reap the benefit on the field, but it's really no magic formula. Like, you can do this, like everything else is going to set up pretty good for you in the
How'd
relation.
you handle guys that maybe weren't as enthused about the classroom? That was hard for me because I was not that type of player, and I
Yeah.
was not that type of coach either. That was hard for me dealing with players that didn't value going to class.
Yeah, I think we had I mean I think over my career, I mean certainly there were issues where guys were less motivated and more motivated on the field than they were in the classroom, and I mean I certainly can understand that perspective. School and that desire and that drive isn't for everybody, and that doesn't mean that they're lazy. The laziness kicks in when, hey, I haven't been to class in a week and a half. Well, that's lazy, right? You can go to class and you can sit in the front, you can be present, you can be engaged, and that honestly, the small school is half the battle. If you can build that relationship with your professor and things like that. For the guys that maybe weren't as motivated, I think it was very much an approach of, hey, the consequences aren't something physical, like that's not going to get you to change your behavior. Are the what's the messaging that we as a coaching staff can give our players that will help engage and change their behavior, and physical stuff just isn't, in my opinion. I mean, again, you can poll 100 coaches and we might all say differently, but that may in the moment lead to them to make a shift because they don't want to do that again. But ultimately, you're trying to challenge them to think differently over the long term, right? So you want to give them some grace, at least early on. And again, if it's habitual, then yeah, you have to take it and raise the level and raise the expectation, or that ultimate consequence of, listen, you're just not invested into the core values of this program. But you just challenge their thinking. You relate with them as best as you can, but you also say, hey, well, if baseball and this program and this team is important to you, or it's important that you get a degree because you're the first one that's ever done that, and that challenge, it's like, don't paint this picture that it has to be like your friend's degree or it has to be like this, but here's some absolutes that need to happen in order for you to be successful in the classroom. And if you don't do those, then I can tell you right now, it's going to be a very hard road and it's not going to end very well. So
And it's going to carry over onto the field too. It's a mentality.
absolutely,
It's
absolutely.
a lifestyle mentality, and I would try to relay that to guys. I'm like,
Yep,
hey, even if you don't like this class, do well in it, show up.
yep,
It's going to carry over into everything else that you do because you're going to end up again developing those behavior habit changes that you can end up doing things that maybe you don't enjoy as much just by showing up and
yep,
being present.
exactly. Yep, being present exactly there is just like, hey, you have an opportunity here that, I don't care what program you're in, you have an opportunity here that is bigger than yourself, and you have to think that way. And if you don't, then again, like you can probably be successful maybe somewhere else, but just not, at Lynchburg. And you challenge them that way, and hopefully, you look up in a year, 2 years, 3 years, and it's not a aha, thank you. It's a, okay, I know now what I've dealt with, and I see this same thing in another player that's coming through, I want to be able to encourage them and express kind of what I dealt with and how I got through that. Right. And there's just so many people that you can connect to, resources and support groups on campus that will help enable you to be successful because they want you to be. That's their job, that's their responsibility, and they value that just as much as the coach does. So I think being able to recognize that is pretty important with those guys.
I mean, did you have to raise many expectations when you got there in 2018? I mean, you had been there as a player, but you guys hadn't won an ODAC. I hadn't been to the ODAC tournament since 2014 when you show up and you make it. I mean, what were some of those culture things that maybe you had to shift when you got there? Not that they maybe weren't doing it before you got there, but what were some of
Yeah,
those
no,
conversations like when you got there?
yeah, I mean culture, that's the buzzword, but it's I mean my passion like is building teams. Like I love like team building. And it starts with, one, your vision, right? And as being the head coach, it was certainly my vision, but then being able to communicate that with your coaching staff so that they understand what your vision is, and then collecting their parts of your vision. And then so being able to kind of put that in place the first year and establish the culture that is now in place at Lynchburg. And that's why I know that continuing on with Bees and Oscar and Mike and the core group that's been there with me really from the jump, these things will continue to evolve. They'll continue to get stronger and build as we continue to do the right things. And yeah, on the field helps by continuing that standard of championships and winning. I think, early on in that transition, you had to kind of sift through, who is going to help you build that culture. It wasn't even like, oh, who's going to help us win games on the field? It was more about who is going to help us build and aid in this culture. And we found some fantastic guys that, maybe just on the field lacked, some talent here or there, or just really lacked that next level edge to win enough games to be considered successful. But I look back and I think, being able to establish that in the first year and a half, take that first recruiting class and bring them in and just adapt them to the culture that we wanted, which is this is important. We can win at a high level, but we can only win at a high level if you have a desire off the field to do that as well. And so you started to see the work pick up, but you started to see some of the decisions off the field, make a little bit more sense to what we believed in and how we felt. And so, yeah, I think that was, a huge part of our evolution in the first 18 months was very little to do with baseball discussions and more to do with culture discussions and here are our core values and here are our standards. And we didn't have a lot of rules. It was more of like, hey, we need to embrace the bigger than me mentality. And the only thing we ever asked them to do was like in anything that you're doing, just stop and think about what you're doing before you do it. And if you get crossed up or it starts to hurry up on you, whether it's baseball or bigger life things, like remove yourself, like take a step back, remove yourself, slow it down. And again, a lot of the things that
Be the
baseball
observer. I
can
love
relate.
that. Be
Yeah.
the observer. When it
Yep.
when it starts to get fast, step back, take a
Yep.
breath, and just be the
Yeah.
observer of what's going on.
Yep. Relate to what's going on instead of trying to predict
Yeah.
the outcome. Just
Good luck.
slow. Yep. Slow down. And, for an 18 to 20, I mean, heck, it's hard for me to do
Yeah.
that even at 40. So yeah, it's always a work in progress till the day we die. It's a work in progress. But, I think that motivation and that drive to again, just be a great teammate is what's important messaging in our program, and we'll
Is that a
continue to
daily
be.
reminder? Practice, games, are those daily reminders that you're giving them?
Yep. Yep. Yeah. It's very little to do with, hey, this guy's this superstar, this guy's this really great player. And it's more like, listen, you all have a gift. You all can bring something to the table. And yes, your desire to play is what has attracted us to you to bring you to this program, but not everybody can play at that level, not yet. And so what else can you do along the way? And that's why I like Coach Robichaux saying, like, work while you wait, right? And it's not just on the field, but you got to work while you wait in the classroom. You got to work while you wait and doing all those other necessary things so that when your chance does come on the field, you're prepared for it. You're confident with it. And yeah, I took that saying, he had a lot of good ones and he had a lot of good nuggets of information that I've stolen from him and appreciate him sharing those things. And I think that again is what coaching is about. You're stealing a lot of different things, and sometimes you're making them, your own in your own way and your own personality. And other times it's like, all right, I've observed that and I don't really like that. I don't really like how that has been. And that's okay too, because it may work for them, which might not work for you. And that's the cool part about coaching. I really do believe that.
You were very complimentary of your assistants in Iowa, which that was one of the things in our conversation that stuck out is how complimentary you were of them. Did you know you were going to hire those guys when you took over in 18?
Yeah, well, I had worked hard on bees because we were, kind of, we were good friends. And then coincidentally, I'm at Washington and Lee. He's at VMI, so we were in the same place for 2 years and continue to grow our friendship there. And so when I was considering taking the job, I knew it was going to be a heavy task to convince him, but was sharing kind of again my vision. And I think he wanted to do something different with hopefully an opportunity to be a head coach one day as well, and felt like this move could do that. I was fortunate to, kind of fall in with Coach Solbach. He had actually served on the staff the year before with Coach Abel, and through a mutual friend, he was able to connect me with him. And just the moment you meet Mike, you're like, man, we got to have you. And then, the Garcia brothers, Oscar first 4 years ago as our GA, actually Andrew Wright, who was at Charleston at the time, was leaving to take a job, I think with the Yankees, now with the Red Sox. But Andrew had called me and said, "Hey, this was a guy that I was going to give my GA spot to, but I'm leaving. He's in a tough spot." Again, Andrew calls me. I'm like, I'm going to listen, and so, we had Oscar down, and literally within 2 minutes, I knew, hey, if this guy wants a job, I hope he takes it. And he was a game changer. I mean, Bees is exceptional, Mike's exceptional, but Oscar's infectious attitude, his energy was this. That was a changer for our program when he got there 2 years in. We had kind of done the grunt work and really established. We had established what we wanted it to look like, and then really the blessings of Oscar and then Gabe being able to kind of come. And then I can't forget Cody Ellis, who really kind of was our first graduate assistant that really helped us. Again, not the finer days of our program in terms of wins and losses, but really from the ground up, help us strategize and get to that point. And yeah, I would not be having any of these conversations. There would have never been any type of national coach of the year honors or anything like that without those guys. And that's the truth. And I know, coaches get on this platform and that's, what they feel like they need to say. But I truly and honestly know that in my heart. I know the people in our program know that those guys make us go because they're infectious, they're incredible workers, and they just have a great understanding of what we all shared. And so when I stepped away and knew Bees was going to become and be promoted into that head coaching role, like obviously it was a bittersweet moment of stepping away from something that I've done for 17 years and as a head coach for the last 10, but also a sweet feeling knowing that he has more than earned his opportunity to do this, and knowing that he shares a lot of the values that I share, and he's a big chunk of why we're in a position we're in. So I'm really confident, whether I come back as an assistant or whether the program keeps going, it will start to run. It will continue to run, with or without my presence. And I'm proud to say that, we were the kind of the first guys to be able to help, build that thing in the right direction.
I mean, how did practice kind of evolve after those first couple years, and then you added a couple new assistants? How did practice evolve then in the fall?
The competition part of it, instead of, there are times and places for the training and the swing and the mentality there of, hey, I want to get better and skill development. I mean, I'm a firm believer that takes place away from the practice time, post practice, some individual work for certain, but in team practices, the dynamic changed and our program really took the next step when everything we tried to do was competitive, between competitive at bats, um, machine type stuff, just trying to make it as stressful as possible on our hitters, especially. and our defense, so that when the game came, it was a relief not to see the big hack attack and the junior coming at you. And it was just a guy at 86, 88. And you're like, all right, I can handle this guy. I can't handle that machine as it's getting under my hands and it's chewing my forearms off and everything else that they say and hate about machine work. And again, there's a balance, there's a time and a place for it. But I think, yeah, once we started to mix that in with base running and defensive execution, and it wasn't just these, methodical drills, and I think a lot of that needs to be spent in prep work. But once you get going, man, it's all with intent. It's all with that intent and energy level to keep it going, because we battle boredom and frustration all the time. And if we can avoid those things in practice as much as possible, then you look up and you're like, whoa, where did the day go? And so I think that, and it was a
Were you not
collection
doing
of
that
all.
much with Coach Keys? It just always seemed like VCU was so competitive.
Yeah, well, VCU is unique because at the time too, the access to the diamond just wasn't as flexible, I think, as maybe it is now. There was a lot of dynamics that just, I mean, there were times where you wouldn't practice, or you just do a lot of small group work in the cages, or there was the boneyard across the street where just like an old rec field and then they had a Franklin Street indoor gym. So you were utilizing like three or four different places. And so it's hard to kind of establish. That's what's really incredible about his journey and his success was people don't realize, like, they were all over the place in Richmond. They never really had the whole team together, but very few times in the fall, and most of that was spent intersquatting. So he had to do it. He was essentially a northern team in a southern spot, and he had been doing that for years, and obviously excelling great players throughout the program over those years too.
Do you have any fell forward moments? Something you thought was going to set you back, but now looking back, maybe helped you go forward?
Well, my mental health, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I think that was one of those things that I was like, man, am I? Because coaching is such a unique profession, right? It's just one of those things where you're with the people in your program and your coaches more than you're with your own family. And so it's just unique in the sense that, you're spending a lot of time recruiting these players. They may not come, right? There's no certainty in this. And so, yeah, I think my problem, and I think my drawback even to this day probably is like how me personally I measure success. And for the longest time, I think, which has led me kind of down this road of being able to take a step back and kind of get myself healthy, is because I've been so obsessed with winning, and so it does impact relationships more than you would like in a negative way, or it impacts your close relationships with your family or your friends. And so it's not
I
just the
battled it
physical
forever.
time,
I
but it's
battled
the
it.
mental
I
time,
battled it
right? Your
forever.
just mind is always in other places. And, well, why did that recruit say no? Or why did that person say no? They weren't going to come to us. And, you just start to filter that out, and it leads you to a thought process that just isn't encouraging to yourself. So it's kind of that me versus me mentality. So I think that is always, as a coach, like, that's a struggle that I've had, but you don't want to outwardly say that, because then you're like, man, I'm not in control, or I'm not confident in my leadership, or whatever those vulnerable buzzwords are. You start to second guess, can I do this? And can I do this to this level? Right? Because you win a national championship, your team wins a national championship. And there was a lot of joy and there's a lot of gratitude to get to that point. But for me, it was 17 years of like relief, of like, I've been thinking about doing this for the longest time, but what have I given up to be able to do this? And, some things are worth sacrificing for that. And then other things like playing catch with your kids, or being able to pick them up from school, or being able to do that. It's like, I don't want to sacrifice that anymore. And I feel like, hey, I've been able to accomplish what I needed to do. I've proven what I needed to do to myself, most importantly. And now I'm ready for the next chapter, whatever that looks like in 3, 4, 5 months, or a year, 2 years. That'll figure itself out. And that's where you kind of put your faith in other things.
Was there one moment where it was like, okay, this is maybe abnormal? Because you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. Like in terms of how I felt.
Yes.
Yeah. Certainly abnormal. Yeah. I think,
I've had
a
one
lot of
panic attack,
questioning.
by the way. It's the worst thing
Yeah,
that's ever happened to me. I had
yeah.
one.
No,
I was
I've
at the
had
office late doing recruiting stuff, and you could not have told me that I was not having a heart attack. I had to call the
yeah,
ambulance because nobody was
yeah,
around. I was in my office late working, and there was nobody around, and I called the ambulance, and I went to the
yeah.
hospital and you could not have told me I was not having a heart attack.
And then you question, right? The aftermath of those things is what in the heck just happened,
Yes,
right? Because you just can't process.
because
I'm
you
not a
don't know. Like, it's just gonna
psychologist.
pop. It just creeps up on you.
Yep. Yeah, I'm not a psychiatrist. I
No.
don't, I have no understanding of that field. And I think again, like allowing yourself to ask for that help and that vulnerability side is just not something that I'm accustomed to, right? Because again, you look around and the world is telling you like your success is wins, your success is wealth, your success is, getting into these VIP lounges and the da 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 da. But it's not, right? And so if you believe that for the longest time, I think it wears on you and you just have no idea and you just take the path of least resistance and hey, I'm comfortable as an oxymoron. I'm comfortable feeling this way and I know how to do it this way. And so I'm just going to continue to do it this way. And then you get to a point where like, hey, your long-term health is at stake. And either somebody's going to tell you you need to take a step back, or hopefully, like myself, you can like come to that internal realization that I've got to take a step back, or hey, it's going to lead to more things. It's going to lead to more issues. And so I think that is something that you certainly question because you don't know, right? Like you said, you don't know what you don't know. And I'm starting to figure out over the years a little bit more of that pattern and a little bit more of, hey, when I go into this depressive state or this high anxious state that may lead to a panic attack or something that I haven't really felt too often before, I kind of feel that coming on and I can say, hey, here are my strategies, here are my tools, my box breathing or taking some time with scripture or taking some time by myself or whatever it might be that particular day, being able to really like do that, being able to really kind of dive into that and own that versus, oh no, I'm going to be good. Like, give me some time. Like, I'm going to be okay. I'll be fine tomorrow. I'll be fine next week. Or, hey, I've got something to look forward to. No, man, it's in the now, right? Your future
Mine
is
is sitting with
unpredictable.
it. Just sit with
Your
it. I love
past,
that term.
yeah,
Just sit with it. If I feel anxious or I feel depressed, I end up just sitting there and sitting with it. And
yeah,
meditation has helped me enormously work through all those things because now it's again you become the observer and it's not a freak out. It's just like, okay, I'm feeling something right now, but I'm just gonna breathe into it here. I'm gonna sit with it here for a little bit. And eventually it dissipates, but in the past that would get me. It would build and build and build, and now in the last 6 7 years, I think that the pause is better. I think the finally figuring out how to not let external factors dictate how you feel
yeah,
has been a big one for me
yeah,
where there's no external factors anymore that dictate how I feel and almost like you're taking charge of it a little bit more. But I think that validation piece where you start to search for outside experiences or things to make you feel better and validate your experience. I think that's a tough road to go down.
yeah.
I think
No,
we've all
you're
seen where that ends
exactly.
up. It doesn't end
Yeah,
up well. Whether people chasing fame or chasing the wrong things, like that path leads to somewhere that you eventually don't want to be.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a dangerous road when you're seeking validation from others. And as much as I understand that, and
You
certainly
got
have
to
been,
live it though. That's a
yep,
easier said than done because it's shoved down your throat.
yeah. No,
Social
I'll say
media's
this.
done
I
a
mean,
lot to that.
yeah,
It gets shoved down your throat that
yeah,
you think you should have your best bolt every day, and everybody's just dealing with issues. You just don't
yeah,
see it. That some people are really good at hiding what they're going through.
yeah,
You just don't see it, and very rarely, and hopefully I can bring some light to that. That's why we've done a lot of these, and they've all been great. I get a lot of responses from listeners that appreciate these types of episodes because I think it shines light on that. Even the most successful that we have, like we all deal with things,
yeah,
where I think it makes it more human, and also I don't think it. I think it makes it seem like it's not impossible. It's not an impossible journey. It's not. There. People are regular people, and people have struggles. There's a daily struggle for all of us, and I think that's what I've appreciated the most about the guests that have come on here is that it just shows that we are human. Well, all of us are human. We're all human.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I appreciate, your willingness to, share these topics, right? Especially with coaches, because it is such a, it is such an awesome network of people. And I can't tell you how fortunate I am to the people and specifically the coaches,
You have a great
that
network, by the
reached
way.
out,
You have a
that
great
have
network.
reached out. Yeah.
People
And
that
it's
care
just,
about
I
you a
mean,
lot. You have a
even
wonderful.
coaches that I don't even know that have reached out or directly messaged me or made comments about, hey, I appreciate you sharing that. I felt the same way. And I think you look around and a lot of our coaches at different levels are feeling that same way, right? They have the pressure of the love for their family, their relationships away from the sport that they're coaching. And then they're dealing with some of these other internal things, anxiety, depression, whatever. And it's just like, no, it's not just our 18 to 22-year olds. It's a lot more than just that. And again, if it's regulated and it's at a level where coaches can deal with it, then great. But we just have been taught like, oh, we'll just keep
Just
this
power
to
through it.
ourselves because this is not a good standard for our kids to see, or this is not a good emotion for our kids to see. And that's just I just think that's wrong. I just think that's
It's a
wrong. I
bad
think
narrative.
they
Terrible narrative.
desire,
It's a
yeah,
terrible
they
narrative.
desire that fellowship, they desire that likeness, and if you and that like-mindedness in a way. And so, not to say they want you to be struggling, but all they need to hear is, hey, I understand. Like, I
Yes.
understand what you're dealing with, and not to trump their story with your story or something like that, but just to listen, to be able to say, hey, I can't maybe help you with this situation, but I'm glad to listen. But I'm also glad to walk you to the people that need to sit in front of so that you can get the help. And this first step of asking for help or a desire to seek more information about what you're dealing with, that's huge for these kids and these young men. And if they don't feel like they have the program and the atmosphere to do that, then that again is gonna it's gonna torment your program beyond what you even recognize. And if you don't allow those conversations to happen, it can be really detrimental to your program because even if it's peer to peer or just, hey, it's okay. Like, it's okay to feel this way, but what's not okay is for you to continue to treat yourself disrespectfully. Like, this is where you need to put a finish line on that, and you need to move towards seeking the appropriate help. And it goes with coaches too. I don't care if you're 60 years old and grew up not having any idea what this means and still kind of refusing to believe that this is something that falls within our student athletes and falls within what they deal with daily. Like, no, that's just, I don't care who you are, like, it's a real thing and needs to be addressed more publicly
Yep.
by people just to be able to share, right? There's no banner to it, there's no foreman to it. It's just like sharing amongst each other can just help. It can help relate. It can help people kind of be like, okay, well, all right, well, that person is dealing with the same things. I'm sorry that you're dealing with that, but all right, what did you do? Like,
Exactly.
how did you take the proper steps to get there? And I think that's where coaching is really awesome because there's so many great coaches out there that do care about each other,
Yes.
and you may be competitors and you may not know each other very well, but when push comes to shove and something of this serious nature comes to light, those guys are going to be the first ones there being like, man, like, I had no idea, but I'm dealing with the same thing. How did you deal with it? And that's also some of the things beyond the field, right? We share our first and thirds and our offensive philosophy and all that, but it's more than just that. And I think that's really when you take that next step as a coach, and you really raise that level. If you can identify success as something other than wins and losses and all the other stuff. So,
And for you, I'm excited. When I saw it, obviously it's like, okay, here's another one. Somebody's dealing with the same things, but then it's also okay, give them a chance to recharge and reevaluate and then get back into, whatever your timeline is. But
Yeah.
again, I think that was kind of a common theme during COVID too, is coaches were actually forced to get away from it. And I think everybody was able to just kind of take a little bit of a breath, get away from it. Now COVID's been gone for a while, so we're kind
Right.
of back into it. But for me, I was like, okay, good for him. Like he's able to recognize that, because there's not a lot of guys that can do that. Like they don't recognize it and they just keep going at it and going at it and going at it. I appreciate the fact that you recognize it and you're able to make an adjustment.
Well, thank you. And again, thanks for your work and highlighting this and bringing this to, the attention of others, because I think your work can really help, again, kind of navigate, some other coaches that, again, may be feeling that, and, kind of help bridge the gap, for them on, hey, here's some tools and some ways that you can get support.
Yep. Yep. Well, I appreciate your time, Coach. Thanks for
Thanks, Ryan.
everything.
Thanks for
Yep.
having me.
Yep.
Appreciate the
Yes,
time as
sir.
well.
I'm down the
Good
road, so if
sharing
you
with
need
you.
something, hit me up.
Appreciate it. Take care and look forward to running into you in the future.